Hello, I hope that everyone is able to join this webinar now, hosted by the Cancer Drug Development Forum, on one of the most important topics in cancer drug development today. My name is John Smyth, and I have the privilege of being the chairman of the board of CDDF. And we want to introduce ourselves, as on this slide, as an international non-profit organization registered in Belgium that provides a totally neutral platform to bring all the stakeholders together who are involved in this very complex issue of transferring a brilliant idea from a scientist in a laboratory through the processes of clinical research, getting approval from regulators, the very, very challenging position that HTA bodies have, the health technology assessors, who are challenged with the difficulty of opportunity costs. And of course, we're very concerned to involve patients and patient advocates. And I'm delighted to know that the regulatory authorities and of course HTA are increasingly involving patients in these very complicated decisions. If I could have the next slide, please. Thank you. Just a few technical aspects about this. We ask all participants, and there are nearly 120 of you, which is wonderful, to be on mute, which gives us the best sound quality. If you have any technical problems, please use the chat function for that. And the questions can be asked at any time during the presentation, which you're about to hear, on the Q&A function. I'm joined today by my colleague and our medical director of CDDF, Jaap Verweij, and he will help with the questions at the end of the Dr. Lacombe's presentation. So the program is, in a moment, I'm just going to introduce Dr. Denis Lacombe, and we will have 30 minutes for questions on these very important topics after Denis has spoken. I don't think Denis Lacombe needs any introduction. I'm sure most of you know him. He's Director General of the EORTC. He qualified in medicine in Marseille, did a research stint at the Roswell Park Memorial Institute in Buffalo, and worked for a while with pharma before starting a long and very distinguished career with the EORTC. He is now the Director General, and I can think of no one better to address the complexity of the issues with all these stakeholders, particularly concerning the issue of whether or not the thinking is joined up and whether the different stakeholders are interacting in a way that's optimal. So without further ado, let me hand the floor, please, to Denis Lacombe.
Okay, so thank you, John, for this kind introduction, and thank you for the invitation today to speak about this topic, from treatment development to healthcare, and actually sharing some high-level and less high-level ideas about how we address the continuum from drug development into access, and how we can actually address the challenges that we have today in a complex environment. So what I would like to do, of course, first is a little bit to set the scene and what is the role in the society of the various actors. I think, of course, there is the for-profit sector that brings new drugs, brings innovation, new technology to the market. There is, of course, huge support also in research from governments, from the public sector, but there is also the non-for-profit sector who completes this, I would say, complex agenda to try to understand actually how we are going to optimally use the treatments. And I guess together we form an ecosystem where we try, of course, to address effectiveness in the societal output for the patients. We try to, of course, to reformat the ecosystem, to co-create new system at a time where everything around us is changing, and certainly to maintain sustainability of our system, whether it's the system of drug development, whether it's the healthcare system, so that we can ensure, of course, access to therapeutic progress to all patients. So I think for this, there are different stakeholders, and of course, what is usually extremely visible is what I depict here as the blue part of this in this arrow, is the pharmaceutical development that aims, of course, to bring new treatment to the market, so get regulatory approval. But I think one needs to admit that once a drug is on the market, there are still many, many questions to be addressed. And that's what I will be referring to: optimization. How do we optimize treatment? And these are the so many questions that the not-for-profit sector attempts to inform the community, the patients, the healthcare system. And it's about combination, how to use the drug. It's about sequence. It's about dosage. It's sometimes about decommissioning or de-escalating treatment. It's addressing question about duration. It's also benchmarking treatment, or eventually also addressing a specific population. So there is a great deal of research that is done in the so-called post-marketing area, but usually by the independent sector, often in cooperation with the pharmaceutical industry, to address this question and to deliver data sets, robust data sets to the doctor, in the healthcare system, to ensure we optimize the therapeutic strategy. And again, it's about drugs, but it's also about radiation oncology, it's about surgery, and it's about combination of all the discipline. And just to depict, to make sure we have a good understanding today of what we are talking about, this is just, I would say, a selection of the EORTC portfolio. The EORTC, that's the type of trial we are doing, and you will see briefly, for instance, here the current standard of care in glioblastoma, which is a combination of drug and radiation oncology that actually we brought to the market. You will see here purely a randomized clinical trial addressing radiation oncology. You will see the MINDAC trial, which is a dose de-escalation type of trial. You will see quality of life example, and so on and so forth. So just that it's very clear in this continuum, actually, what is the role and the position of this type of research. So what are the challenges that I want to address in this webinar today? Is basically that, of course, you all know that our environment and the way we develop new drugs and new treatment has changed, usually based on their mechanism of actions. This has had quite an impact on regulatory science, and we see now new drugs hitting the market based on very, very early data set, often non-randomized data set. We've seen also histology agnostic trial hitting the regulator, and so we see a lot of innovation. But the question also is, we have seen innovation not necessarily there, and how it transforms actually into real clinical benefit to patients. So how do we measure it? How do we identify? And also, how do we give access to this innovation, and on which basis? And again, how do we integrate this in multidisciplinary strategy? Because in real life, the patient is not treated by a single drug. It's especially in oncology, it's extremely rare where we see a situation where a patient gets one drug or one treatment forever. Usually it's a combination, and again, it's also combination alongside the evolution of this disease. So we've seen, and there have been many publications about that, many drugs which actually did not hold their promises, despite they were claimed to be innovations. And all these questions that I've just alluded before about these clinically relevant questions often remain unaddressed, and we have a lot of missing data. So in the question is, at the time when drugs are actually, we are in a very, I would say, rich environment. We have many new drugs. They are, of course, they bring challenges in terms of access, in terms of pricing. So what is the impact on access in this environment? And actually, where can we find the answer? How we optimize this drug development? So I think we have many challenges, and that's what we discuss typically in a scientific agenda, such as the EORTC with the clinician, is understanding the complexity of the disease, the tumor, its microenvironment. We see fragmentation of the disease. We have major question about residual disease, about heterogeneity of the disease, what are the partners of relapse, and we have extremely complex and evolutive multidimensional data sets. It's clinical data, it's biological data, it's imaging data, and we try, of course, to deliver that to bring robust evidence to patient and to society. So what we see in this multi-dimensional complex landscape that we have today is that we question, because are the endpoints oriented to inform about the drug, about the activity of the drugs? Are the endpoint more patients oriented, like addressing quality of life and survival? Because the standard of care are evolving so rapidly, sometimes what are the control arms? Actually, how do we design clinical trial optimally? Because are, for instance, the clinical trials reflecting the real populations out there? So can we move also to more pragmatic trials? How do we ensure the long-term follow-up of patient and long-term toxicity? So again, what is the external validity of this clinical trial? And this is even more acute if the trial that get to the regulator are extremely early data sets. So again, the objective, of course, is to ensure that innovation gets the patient as early as possible. But then if we do so, what do we do thereafter in the ecosystem that I've tried to depict to you to ensure the external validity? So on which basis, again, in the healthcare system, can we give optimal access if we don't have actually answers to question, again, like duration, like treatment, and what is then the value of these treatments when indeed we've seen some of them being decommissioned? I don't want to speak about pricing. I'm not an expert about pricing, but I always question, how can we price anything if we don't have all the information about it? And this, of course, feeds into the methods that we are using. And often I see a debate between clinical trial, real-world data. So we have a number of new tools. We have indeed the classical regulatory trial with very strict eligibility criteria. There are more pragmatic trials that can be so pragmatic that they can be done in real life. We have new study design, histology agnostic, basket, and name them. We have registries, real-world data, real-world evidence. So to some extent, we have a lot of solutions, but how do we reorganize them? How do we learn about all of them? And how do we actually sequence them so that we actually get the maximum information to, again, try to bring therapeutic progress to all patients as much as possible. And of course, it has to be affordable. So it seems to me, and these are the first ideas I would like to share with you, is that we need to have a new continuum and that we have a little bit to re-engineer, and we have to realign the stakeholders. And I would like to present it relatively simplistically, is that we have clinical science, we have regulatory science, and this is quite well organized. But I want to believe that there is a pragmatic gap to have this data set that will inform HTA and access science. And this pragmatic gap actually is represented by the type of trial I've started with to show you. And the question is, in a complex environment where it becomes much more difficult because of the regulatory environment, because of the cost of drugs and so on, how do we address this pragmatic gap in the current world? So I think we need a little bit to re-engineer. We are in a society that is changing for many reasons. COVID is one of them. And I always refer to this Canadian skater because he's so good that he was asked, actually, why are you so good? And he said, basically, I don't skate where the puck is, but where it should be. And I would like to raise the question whether sometimes our treatments, the way we approach things, we have not been making them too much drug-oriented. And how do we evolve to more patient-oriented science and patient-oriented clinical research? Again, there is nothing wrong, I believe. On the contrary, we need drug-oriented research for innovation, but we should not drop it there. And that's what we see now, is that there is this gap. Some refer to the gap efficacy, effectiveness, that actually, I think, is enlarging. So I think we need to really address what is the ultimate goal and what are the means. So I want to share with you that I think that any accelerated approach, of course, has the potential to bring innovation extremely fast to the clinic. But we should not undermine that there are negative consequences, especially if drugs, for instance, would be toxic. So the question is, how do we control this uncertainty for the individual patient, but also for society, if society had to pay for the treatment and potentially for the side effects? And I think, again, we should re-engineer, but maybe we should also address what are the policy action so that we reinvent ourselves. So I would like to give some example, because of course otherwise it remains a little bit theoretical, and I have many examples, so I've made of course a biased selection, but I would like of course to a little bit refer to the fact that sometimes there is an iterative process to find the dose, and this, in that case, is the example of pembrolizumab. So there are again many questions that are not necessarily solved immediately, and that this needs to be addressed. I think this leads sometimes to confusion for the doctors out there, for the patients. And I would like here to basically to refer to a French clinical trial that is currently, I guess, in preparation, which basically will address the question about the dose, about the sequence. So you see that it's a trial in non-small cell lung cancer, and you can see that actually not all the questions, what could be actually basic questions, are not necessarily addressed at the time of marketing authorization. And the question that the French are asking is there less? Are we going to be able maybe to give less toxicity? But also there is a societal impact, because the pulse regimen, for instance, will save quite a bit at the level of of course, the treatment of each patient, but also at the level of the country. And actually, the question we've been discussing with the French is why this trial should not be actually, or this type of trial should not be immediately be designed as soon as a new technology is made available, so that these questions are taken, and why these questions cannot be actually at the European level, because we are here in Europe, so that we can optimize that and that we give it access to all European citizens in each of their healthcare systems. So we think here there is a way that we should readdress all these missing questions, and this is of course funded by the public national system in France. It would be extremely difficult today actually to do this trial in Europe, just for funding reasons. And just continuing into immunotherapy, I will just be brief, because I guess you all know that actually the biomarkers are not necessarily optimal, whether it's tumor mutational burden, whether it's MSI, whether it's the PDL, that there is a lot of variability in terms of response. And when actually we look at the response according to the tumor mutational burden, there are even in some cancer terms that there are more responders in the non-high segment of the tumor mutational burden. So, all these raise questions. We have not optimized to who we give it. The duration actually of immunotherapy is not there. The schedule, the dose. So I think, again, it's not a critic, it's not a bad point, but are we having the systems? Are we having the everything in place so that we are going to address that properly, so that we actually ensure that in the healthcare system, the robustness of the data are there to treat patients. And I would like also to give another example. It just happened to be also in lung, but there are other examples, and it is was published very recently, 3 months ago. It is the OcuMertinib again in non-small cell lung cancer, EGFR positive, where of course the difference in terms of median disease-free survival is quite large. But I was also very interested by a paper that was just published earlier this month, at the beginning of January, that look at it on a very critical approach. And basically, this critical analysis of the paper raised very interesting point. I thought whether, for instance, is DFS the relevant endpoint when potentially we are addressing a cured patient population? Should the objective should not be long-term survival, where it would be it would be more relevant. So it is certainly a secondary endpoint, but it's not yet published. It's not mature. They question also the fact that DFS, which can be considered as a surrogate endpoint, has been documented in the era of chemotherapy. Is it still valid in the era today when the treatment of this tumor has substantially changed? There is also a risk at this point in time because they found that in this trial, basically 60% of the patients actually receive chemotherapy. To switch to basically a new drug, very attractive, extremely interesting data, but don't switch too early because chemotherapy has demonstrated a survival benefit, not yet this drug. So, and even if there is an effect, there are side effects. So, of course, we have to. Should it be added? It has a cost. And of course, we have the design. We have the issue in the design is that in the control arm, patients, of course, will receive the drug at recurrence. So, how do we assess overall survival? So I think this is a very interesting question, whether these trials are designed optimally and whether we should not look, for instance, at immediate versus delayed access. And then having a primary endpoint as overall survival. So instead of randomizing versus, maybe in sequence. And I couldn't put it because in the interest of time, but we had seen exactly the same type of issue with a trial in prostate cancer that studied abiraterone from the castrate resistant into the sensitive status of prostate cancer, and it was exactly the same issue. It was immediately randomizing in the sensitive population when in the optimal design should have been actually an immediate versus delayed access, and then that would really inform on the benefit of the drug and when to use it. So maybe we have the tools, but maybe we have to do it differently. And of course, we have to address that because we realize that these would be trials with much longer endpoint, but would be the right one actually to inform. So, of course, this has to be taken into the global landscape that is growing of new drugs. You know as well as I do that there are some questions anyway about targeted therapy, whether they bring a substantial survival benefit. The number of drugs that are coming, and it's a good success. We have many weapons, but again, we should make sure not to cut the limb on which we sit, because of course they have a cost, and actually we don't know how to use them. And here there is a big risk that actually we do not bring to the patients and to the healthcare system the appropriate information to choose between all these treatment, and actually again when we choose how to give them. So what I would like also to propose is, as part of this thinking, as part of how we should question ourselves as a community, how we work together, is whether instead of working in only one direction, whether to some extent some of these questions should not be addressed a little bit the other way around. So sometimes start from the real clinical needs. So, for instance, if I take the example of immuno-oncology, one of the questions that is an answer is the duration. So how do we address that? So maybe it's too late to address this question now, but there are a number of questions that are important in the routine, in the clinic, and we should have a mechanism to address them extremely rapidly, again, so that we optimize all our therapeutic strategy, again, for obvious reasons, but also for economic reasons. So some conceptual changes should be that when we identify candidate therapy that are promising, is that we should have some sort of checkpoint about what are the key questions. Maybe there should be a more, I would say, independent role on how we are going to assess this question, because we have to pay attention that indeed some of these questions may lead to decommission, to shorter treatment, and so on. So it should be looked more at the level of the society. And I believe that also there are free science that come together. Is clinical research, because you see, and I try to depict that the methodology can evolve, should evolve, must evolve towards what type of trial we use based on which type of endpoint. Epidemiology, because the diseases are evolving, but also health economics. And I think that if we would have mechanisms, for instance, to bring this discipline together to assess the key question, maybe we could be doing better work and generate data sets that are more informative to clinicians, but also to the HTA body and to the healthcare system. So I would like to make some conclusion statement, is that you see it's a broad topic, because it's about reengineering, it's about reorganizing ourselves, it's about the methodology of our clinical trial, it's about the type of clinical, it's about the type of clinical trial, it's about who takes the role of doing this type of trial or this type of trial, who pays for it. But I think we should develop as a society the means to generate data sets such as comparative evidence, which would be aimed at really documenting the optimal treatment for cancer patients. And for this, we need to integrate clinical research, potentially at some point in time free of commercial interest, in the process of access into healthcare. So for this, we need to re-engineer. And again, there are many parameters that we have to address. I think we need also to reinvent the partnership between commercial and non-commercial commercial research. And I'm sure there would be a cross benefit for all. Again, that we really readdress this process between clinical science, regulatory science, and what I call also access science. And to some extent, we should also mandate that based on public health priorities, because we cannot ignore that our healthcare system are under pressure. So I think this is something that we should also take into account. And again, maybe international, independent, multidisciplinary clinical research can help patients, can help the society with health economics. I believe they should become the health economists should become a partner in addressing these large efforts in the post marketing, so that we again deliver the proper data set. And my last word would be that in a transformative society, we are the actors. We should actually unlearn to some extent what we have done. Of course, we have to keep the good things, but based on this, we should learn how we can do things differently, reorganize, and maybe create a new concept. And I think with this, we can reach a process to inform efficiently, widely applicable clinical research in the best interest of therapeutic progress, and of course, preserving patient interest and right, which is to all of us our first mission. And with this, I would like to close this talk, and I'm ready for question, of course. Thank you very much for your attention.
you very much. I hope, can you hear me now?
I can, yeah.
Good, that's wonderful. Denis, that was a fantastic talk. Thank you very much indeed. And you've covered a broad palette of some very, very important issues. Can I start with, I'm going to ask you a difficult question, but it's something I wrestle with a great deal. I know you said you didn't want to talk about pricing, but you did mention health economics. My question is, do you have any concept of how we could apply some metrics to the value of a new medicine? I find this really difficult because it's a question, obviously people have different concepts of this, but do you have, from the EORTC perspective, do you think we can develop any metrics that puts a value on a new medicine so that we can compare it with other things?
Thank you. Very important question. To be honest, the short answer, no, I don't have. I don't have the answer. I don't think anybody has the magic solution how we can do that optimally. I think again something that I didn't mention in the presentation are initiatives like, for instance, the DSMO scale, which I think are very important tools that we could better use. So I think there are efforts like this, but maybe how we benefit from those actually into a more global approach. And I think there is room to discuss with the health economics, because I came across them, and you may have seen that some slides actually have been borrowed from Ben Johnson. And for me, it was quite illuminating that actually from the health economics point of view and from the science point of view, from the clinical point of view, actually we came exactly to the same conclusion, which is missing data sets. So I think there is work to do. And I think it's part of the reengineering.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I mean, we all understand the commercial approach from industry, which is essential. They have to get some profit to cover R&D and to continue the whole process. But when it gets right through to patient advocacy, who are inevitably going to be very biased, which is why they're there. I would love us to sometime be able to have a really constructive workshop with the health economists to understand this better. But don't let me hog the questions. Jaap, let me turn to you.
Yeah, Denis, thank you for that talk. And you raised a very important and complex issue, of course. Maybe to first ask something on behalf of myself. You showed us the analogy of the ice hockey player skating to where the puck will be and not where it currently is. And you said we should build on ultimate goals that we have. If you would be the ice hockey player, where would you skate to now? What's the first priority ultimate goal in the large complexity field that you identified?
Well, I think the goal for us is very easy. As the goal for the skater is to have the puck and to have a point. I think for us is to deliver treatment. So what we want is to deliver efficient treatment to patients. And if we have drugs that we don't know how to use, we have not reached the goal, or that we don't know how to optimally use, and if we are doing a little bit still empiric type of treatments. So I think we should do the extra mile so that we deliver this data set. And for me, the goal is to have this robust data set that inform treatments optimally.
So that could be basically in arguing by, it could be in competition with the need that we also have that patients get access to good new drugs as early as possible. So patient access is one issue and data maturity is the other issue. How do we get to the best balance there?
Yeah, I think that's the dilemma, and this is something that we have to address, and that's why I like to share these ideas, because I think it's not the solution are not beyond do not belong to a company or to an organization or to the regulator. We have to see how we reinvent the sequence. I think, of course, the goal is not to prevent early access when something makes a big difference. We have to do it, but we have to realize also that there are examples where this was probably not the right thing to do. So the question is, if we give access to innovation extremely rapidly, what do we put in place beyond that to make sure the proper question or the question that are important again for appropriate access are in place. And that, I think that's what we are doing. So I think to some extent, indeed, there can be a competition between early access and having very nice, very mature, very robust, complete data sets. But I think it may take time to produce this. So I think what is important is to reinvent this continuum. But at this point in time, I think that the way we have been doing things is, I always make the analogy, we build an animal, but it has 3 legs and the 4th leg is missing. So the animal is limping.
Good. John, back to you.
There's a very, very interesting question from Navid Malik, which refers to real world experience. And he says, given the learning curve from COVID-19, is it time that we looked more aggressively at the concept of truncated trials and moving more towards real world data and try to reduce our reliance on phase 3 placebo-controlled trials that don't necessarily give us a true picture in clinical practice of how the drug will perform? Do you have a feeling about that, Denis?
So, of course, I'm not a COVID expert, not at all, but actually next week we are going to do a roundtable with the European Respiratory Society, which has been actually extremely exposed to the COVID situation. And actually what they are telling us is that with the wealth of real-world evidence, real-world data that have been accumulated with COVID, basically very few conclusions are being made. And for them, the only valid trial, I'm just quoting what I've been learning from them, is the UK dexamethasone type of trial. And of course, the the vaccine development trial. So basically what they are telling us, and they will be with us on the panel on this panel next week, is basically that they have not been learning a lot of from the real world data because of fragmentation of these data sets and also because of absence of robust methodology. So I'm not saying that real world data is not useful. I think we can learn a lot from real world data, but I think it would be a little bit, to me, challenging to say, for instance, that we can go from a very early data set and that we are going to find all the solutions into real world data. I think this pragmatic gap should be documented with methodology. And when we have an idea, a closer idea, a better idea, again, on the key questions that are relevant for this or this technology, then maybe we can learn from real world data. But making the jump from one hand to the other is, I think, opposed to risk. And just to take the example of duration of immunotherapy, because we have discussed with our melanoma group a randomized discontinuation trial, which was not possible. For reason of cost and basically not supported by the commercial sector, but they are extremely disappointed, as far as I understand, by the real-world data, because basically what they collect is the therapeutic habit of the doctor out there, and that's it. And how do you take conclusion from that?
I think
so that's the issue.
Yeah, I think the other thing I was thinking about when making the analogy of the trials that have been done with COVID. Of course, you get a very quick result with that if it's an antiviral effect and you've got disease which is progressing very rapidly and you either have a dramatic response or not. And my question to you, I see a complete difference in our approach if we're looking at a new indication for a very difficult cancer, let's say cancer of the pancreas, where any benefit you would expect to see very quickly because survival is short. But if you're trying to introduce a new medicine for breast cancer, for example, or non-Hodgkin lymphoma, the duration of the total experience of that patient is going to be quite difficult if you're relying on real world data. So they're very different scenarios, aren't they?
Of course, yes. If you have a clinical situation where you have basically no treatment and then suddenly you come with something that has a massive effect, it's no brainer. But I guess today in 2021, I guess it's not really the majority of the cases. The majority of the cases we are facing and we are discussing with our groups are more this type of pragmatic trials.
Yeah. Do you want?
Yeah, maybe shifting gears a little bit, Denis. This is a question from Roger Wilson on repurposing of drugs that are available already. This is a hot topic. These are usually mature data that are already available for an existing indication, and we're now assuming, well, we're hoping to test the drug in a different indication. Is this is particularly a field where EORTC has been active, could be active? Could you dwell on this?
You mean
how can we make it happen?
Yeah, is it repurposing from drugs outside of oncology into oncology?
No, not. I guess what Roger means here is drugs that are in oncology that could be repurposed for another indication. But I would take it as broad as possible.
Yeah. No, I think this is also typically something that is crucial for patients, because indeed, and that I completely understand, the objective of a commercial of a company may be to open the market for tumors that they find important for their strategies. But of course, if the biology indicates that it's potentially useful for other tumors, this is the type of thing we should be doing. And it's in EORTC, as you know, Jaap, and you've been a leader in that, has track records in actually doing trials with drugs that were not primarily in the interest of the industry, but raised such positive bring such a positive difference for patients that retroactively it served the registration and the extension of the registration. So I think we have indeed to be quite open to that.
Yeah. Maybe a related question to that. You mentioned in your lecture that fragmentation of diseases is something we are facing clearly. So what used to be breast cancer is now, I don't know, 100 different diseases, which is creating a challenge for the design of an adequate trial, but another challenge in finding the population to study the drug in, but also finding a population to do the comparator arm in. Just take the example of FGFR inhibitors now. They are very attractive potential new agents, and one is actually already on the market, but the populations are incredibly small. Now, FDA has suggested to use one joint comparator arm between companies, which creates another challenge. Is that a role where you could see an organization like EORTC jump in?
Yeah, so first, from the methodological point of view, I think that it's an extremely good idea, because it's much better to have a prospective control arm rather than any historical arm or control into any real world database, because it's subject to bias. So any prospective trial that can be done with the control arm, for me, gets, of course, a strong advantage. And second, indeed, I think that when there are several potential drug candidates for a smaller population, platform like EORTC, but others can certainly play the role as a neutral body where we can organize this trial. And currently we have such a trial. And for us, what is very important, actually, in a trial that we are currently running in locally advanced and advanced head and neck cancer, is that basically this is the type of trial where patients sign an informed consent, depending on the alteration. If the alteration is druggable, and if there is a drug, the patient can get what we think today is the most adequate drug. And if there is no target identified or no drug for that target, the patient enters into an immunotherapy arm. So I think the beauty of this platform is that, first of all, these are new forms of partnerships between the multiple companies and an academic body that plays basically the interface. But from the patient point of view, we apply the concept of leaving no one behind. And I think that's very important for the doctors, because they are almost guaranteed for any patient that is eligible for the trial to have access to one arm. So I think everybody benefits: the company, the research body like the EORTC, the patients, and the doctor. And I think that's what we have a little bit to reinvent. What can we do better under new form or new type of partnerships, which makes all of us much more efficient.
Yeah, thanks. John, back to you.
It's interesting. So there'll be so many lessons from this ghastly pandemic, but what we're beginning to hear is some collaboration between big pharma companies. I was hearing yesterday more to do with manufacture than anything else, but there may be slightly better collaborations in the future. Emila Radka's asked an interesting question about rare cancers, Denis. She says, thank you for the talk. The concept presented that public health priorities should command where clinical research goes is intriguing. However, might it be difficult to apply this for rare cancers? I'd be interested in your view.
Yes, well, rare cancer, of course, are sometimes a little bit specific because often there is no treatment, so you are still often basically in a research agenda. But I think you can think about them differently, because if we, for instance, give us the means to study their biology, and we have tried to do these trials at the EORTC, where basically across the biology of several rare cancers, you bring them on the same protocol. So basically, you look at a patient population that is actually that there is very few or no therapeutic option, and basically you question the biology, and then you mandate what you need potentially to have to help them. So that's a sort, of course, of basically looking at a clinical problem differently, rather than pushing drugs into a system and eventually finding later on if this or this tumor can also benefit. Yeah. So it's really starting from the clinical problem. I have a bunch of tumors. They are very rare. There is maybe not much for them. By chance, maybe they are driven by similar alteration. Can we do something for them?
Yeah. I had a related question about what we now call precision medicine. Jaap's just mentioned that breast cancer is now many very different diseases. I perceive a tension between the intellectual priority of saying, let's be as precise as we can in a target population in a particular cancer, which might well lead to high response rates because you're approaching the right subgroup of patients, but you then might get a license for only a subgroup of patients, let's say in breast cancer, whereas the pharma companies, for understandable reasons, would like the broadest possible indication. Do you feel within EORTC in your discussions, do you feel that the so-called era of precision medicine with these much smaller trials, do you feel that that's the way forward, or is that causing problems?
Well, I think we should. I think at this point in time we have so many opportunities, and again, so many type of solutions from different type of trials and so on, that we can address a number of things. It's always the same question: what do you want to do, and what methodology you are going to use? Again, I will take maybe an opposite example, but if you want to make a conclusion for a treatment based on real world, I don't think it's the right method. You need, if you want to make a decision, I think you need more robustness. So again, I think what is the clinical problem? What is the question that is in front of us? And what is the methodology and where we are in the sequence? And again, let's match it to the clinical situation, because indeed the rare cancer is not a breast cancer. So potentially there are solutions, but again, we have to understand what we are doing. So I wouldn't close any door, of course, at this point in time. Let's remain open. Let's allow all the possibility, but then we should have this sort of, what I'm pleading for is more this first appropriate methodology, understanding what we do and checkpoints, and don't hesitate to decommission and move on, adjust and optimize. So that's more in that respect.
I understand, and that was the point you were making about going backwards rather than forwards in the traditional way. So we actually start with a patient need and a question, and then design the trial to address that need, rather than the conventional way of starting with a new invention and looking to see how we can use it best.
Again, I think we still need, of course, to bring innovation, and discovery is good and so on, but I think we need a more indeed balanced type of approach at the time when we have so many, and we have so many constraints around us.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, over to you.
Yeah, Denis, you touched upon the issue of the accelerated approval that is quick, and the need to also get mature data, and your conceptual change was also focusing on that. Now, in the current pathway for accelerated approval, for instance, at EMA, and I think and FDA is the same, there is a framework already that ensures follow-up and confirmation of the early assumptions that were made. And companies are, well, you could say, asked kindly to provide additional data after approval to make sure that the data set matures. If you take that into account, how would your concept then build upon that, or how would it lead to a change in the way that we currently work?
Yeah, I think you are referring to management entry agreements. So what companies would be bound to deliver to get confirmation. Of course, I think this is one step in the right direction. The question is how far the companies and potentially the regulator are fit for purpose for addressing the questions that are really critical in the clinic. Because again, I think some questions are, again, de-escalation, reducing dose, reducing schedule, optimizing biomarker, refining patient population, and with all the respect, and I think the commercial sector is doing certainly a very important and very nice job, but I think this type of question are obviously in the remit of the independent sector. They cannot be addressed by the commercial sector. And I was referring earlier to the randomized discontinuation trial that we try to do with the melanoma group for the duration of immunotherapy. Industry, of course, rejected to support this type of trials. While it's still 10 years after immunotherapy is available, almost 10 years, this is an answer question. So I think we need also to find, and again, don't get me wrong, I think, again, industry does a good job, but I think we need a good balance between the drug development question, the societal question, the patient-oriented question, and I think that's what we have to reinvent and re-engineer. But I think we need a better balance.
So what you're basically suggesting us to add new questions to the existing database, so and ask new questions basically.
And what are the right questions that actually are again needed for the daily use.
Yeah, John.
Yeah, in my introduction, I emphasized that the CDDF is particularly keen to involve patients and patient advocates, and we've got another question in from one of our patient supporters, Roger Wilson, about PRO, about patient-reported outcomes. So Roger's saying patient-reported outcomes have a growing role as endpoints in studies, and the EORTC has played a big part in establishing robust methodologies. Do you see the time arriving soon when PRO primary endpoints provide the basis for regulatory approvals?
So that the question should be addressed to the regulator, but to be honest, it's a discussion we had started with the European Medicine Agency. Actually, our lead statistician at the EORTC, Jan Bogaerts, has been discussing the possibility to do a workshop with the regulator, with the EMA. Unfortunately, Brexit, COVID, and so on has kept the move of DME and so on, keeps pushing it back. But this is something, it seems to me, that the regulator is particularly interested, and I think we are very, I would say, lucky to have a regulator in Europe that really, I think, opens the debate in that direction.
I think it's very, very interesting because I see a very close proximity to good quality PRO, patient-reported outcomes, and the concept that we're talking about of real-world data. Because at the end of the day, what all of us want is to know if these medicines are seen to be useful by patients and their families. And that doesn't come through a phase 3 clinical trial. And of course, EORTC very much led the way with way back with quality of what we used to call quality of life studies. So I think the technology that is being developed for patient-reported outcomes gives us a lot of hope. And I hope that EORTC will continue to be really interested in that, because your neutrality, not being commercial, I think your neutrality could be very, very helpful with that. And there's no implication that there would be bias. If you get a commercially sponsored trial with PRO, there's always the risk that people say, yes, well, you're harvesting the results from certain subsets of patients. But EORTC, I think, could play a really big role in that.
I will try to do indeed. We think that patient-reported outcomes, any type of, I would say, patient-related type of endpoint, we should develop the efforts. I think I say also we need research on research, research on research methodologies, because indeed we have new tools, whether it's the technology, access to data, accessing to patients indeed in real life. So I think we need to reinvent also alongside that. And again, that's this all continuum that we need to make sure. But again, I think we need to build it very cautiously. We cannot jump from one end to the other.
Yeah, very, very interesting. We're almost out of time. Yeah, we have time for one more question if you have.
Yeah, here's a question that Francesco Lorenzo puts forward. I mean, you mentioned the need that society should develop means to generate extended data sets, re-engineer models for partnerships and commercialization of drugs. So where would you see the priority there? Should we start with changing policies? Do we need an activity there of regulatory bodies? Should it be an activity of EORTC and similar organizations? Where should the start be?
So I think it's a very important question, because the problem is actually, in my first slide, I said, where do you find the answers? And the problem that we have here is exactly central to the European construction, is that anything that is pre-marketing is a European competence, is the EMA. Once approved, it gets into the healthcare system, and then it's national competence. And when you see the French trial, the PULSE trial, which is going to be done in France, that's exactly what we don't have in Europe, is the capacity to do these trials in a coordinated way at a European level extremely efficiently. So indeed, I think we need to do policy work. Again, I think this is completely underestimated and absolutely not addressed by the cancer mission, by the cancer plan in Europe. I think it's not really seen. You see treatment optimization, but I think it's completely underestimated. And I'm afraid it's extreme, and I realize it's extremely complex. So there is a difficulty for various stakeholders to understand, and also it's also difficult for patients to understand. But I think in general, this concept of treatment optimization is not really well understood. And that's why I would like, again, to thank CDDF for giving me this opportunity to try indeed to vehicle this. And there is a big interrogation mark for me, how far, for instance, the cancer mission, how far the cancer plan is going to take that forward. But if it does not, I think it's a major missed opportunity. And again, believing that the real world data is going to solve everything, I think is a mistake. It will help do something, but it will not solve the critical questions.
Denis, I think we have to come to the end of this. I'm sorry there isn't time for more questions, but you've given us an absolutely wonderful presentation and discussion. And I hope very much that this is the beginning of what could be an ongoing discussion with CDDF. There are so many stakeholders who would benefit from listening to and challenging the 3 points for conceptual change that you raised: clinical research, epidemiology, and health economics. And I hope very much that we can construct a full workshop around that in the near future. But thank you very much indeed, Denis, a really superb talk and raising these important issues for discussion. And thank you to all our participants. There are a lot of you at this webinar, and we're always very interested in your feedback. So please do use our web page to contact us and let us know positive or negative points about our webinar program. But for today, I have to close this, and thank you all very much indeed for joining.